I wasn't supposed to be there. That's the thing nobody tells you about the moments that change you. They don't send a calendar invite. They don't give you time to press record or adjust your angle or take a breath. They just happen. And then you're standing there, heart somewhere up near your tonsils, and the world has reorganized itself around you. And you're thinking, did I just see that? It was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays in London in late October have a specific quality to them, a kind of gray that isn't quite sad, but isn't quite not sad either. The kind of gray that settles over the city like a damp wool coat somebody forgot to dry properly. I've been in the city for 3 days at that point, staying with my cousin in Pimlico, and I'd done the things you do when you visit London and you don't have a real plan. I'd eaten a soggy pasty outside of Pret, I'd stared at the Thames for longer than was probably healthy, and I'd walked. Just walked. No direction. No map open. Just feet on pavement, turning left when left felt right. That's how I ended up on the Mall. If you've never walked the Mall on a gray October Tuesday when the tourists have thinned and the horse chestnut leaves are doing that beautiful falling thing they do, that spinning, lazy, absolutely unhurried descent, then I'm not sure I can fully explain the particular feeling of it. It's not peace exactly. It's more like suspension. Like the city has agreed for just this stretch of road between the park and the palace to hold its breath. I had my coffee. I had my hands in my jacket pockets. I had absolutely no idea what was about to happen. The gates at Buckingham Palace always draw a crowd, even on quiet days. There's something almost magnetic about them. Black iron and gold, absurd and perfect, the kind of thing that exists nowhere else in the world, and that photographs will never quite capture. People cluster at the railings the way they cluster at the edge of cliffs, not from danger, but from the specific human need to be close to something immense. That morning the crowd was manageable. Maybe 40, 50 people scattered along the length of the railing. A handful of Japanese tourists with serious camera equipment. A family from somewhere in the American South. I could hear the drawl, soft and warm, the mother explaining something to her youngest about what the guards do and why they don't move. A teenage boy in a Tottenham kit eating crisps with the energy of someone who had absolutely been dragged here against his will. The guards stood at their posts the way they always stand. That specific stillness they have, the way it reads to a civilian eye as barely human. Like someone has paused a very tall, very serious video game character. You watch them and you think, nothing can move that. And that thought is, in a way, the entire point of them. They're a symbol made of flesh, a message written in red and black and bear fur, pressed into the architecture of the day. I stood a bit back from the railing, not fighting for position, just watching the way I do, at the margins where you see more because nobody is watching you back. That's when the convoy arrived, not with fanfare, not with the dramatic police escort sirens you see in films, just quietly. 3 black vehicles, moving with that particular unhurried authority that somehow commands more respect than speed ever could. The lead car turned off the main road, and the crowd, without anyone organizing it, tightened. People shifted. Phones came up. The American mother put her hand on her youngest child's shoulder. I didn't know at first who was in the vehicles. You don't from that distance. You see the flags, you register the plates, you understand from context that whoever this is, they matter. The shift in the air tells you. People don't make that kind of collective intake of breath for a transport minister. The vehicles moved toward the side entrance, the one slightly removed from the main gate, used, as I'd read somewhere once, for more routine arrivals. Low-key, unofficial in atmosphere, if not in practice. The kind of entrance that says, we are not performing today, we are simply arriving. There may be 20 of us who had drifted to the better vantage point without meaning to, following the energy, following that instinct that says something is happening, stand closer to the something. The second vehicle stopped. A door opened. And this is where my memory does the thing where it both slows down and becomes more vivid, the way important seconds always do. I saw a small figure stepping out. A child, 7, maybe 8 years old, small red coat, dark hair, moving the way children move when they've been in a car too long, and the ground is an invitation they've been waiting on, with that particular combination of eagerness and not quite having your legs under you yet. The figure stepped forward, and then the step became something else. A stumble. Then, nothing under her. Then the ground coming up. It happened fast. It always happens fast. But here's the thing about watching something bad happen to someone small. Time does not cooperate. Time refuses to let it be fast. Time insists you see every frame. The child's foot caught on what? The edge of a stone step. A slight lip in the pavement where the surface changed material. Nothing. The kind of nothing that exists in every footpath in every city in the world, that adults navigate unconsciously, that children's shorter legs and different centers of gravity turn into a catastrophe. She went down. Not gently. Not the soft crumple of a trip caught halfway. She went down the way a fall goes when the body doesn't have time to prepare. Knees first, then hands, then the horrible forward momentum that doesn't stop when it should, and her head dropped toward the stone, and the sound that came out of me was not a word. The crowd made a sound. It was not a scream. It was smaller and more terrible than a scream. It was the sound of 40 people simultaneously deciding not to breathe. And then, before the breath came back, before any of us had processed the frames we just witnessed, the guards moved. I need to explain something about Royal Guards, because what I'd thought before this moment, what most people think, is that they are still. That stillness is the totality of what they are. Ceremony, tradition, living statues in expensive hats. What I did not understand, what none of us standing at that railing fully understood until that Tuesday, is that the stillness is not the whole of it. The stillness is the surface. Below it, at all times, is something else entirely. The guard nearest the vehicle. He'd been posted at a distance of perhaps 8 feet from where the car had stopped. 8 feet. Close enough to see. Far enough that under normal circumstances, his role was observation, not intervention. Normal circumstances lasted until they didn't. He moved before I registered that he was moving. That's the only way I can describe it. One moment, he was the statue. The next moment, he was crossing the distance with a speed that seemed to violate the visual grammar of the space, because nothing in that setting is supposed to move like that. The uniform, the bearskin hat, the polished everything. None of it is designed for sprinting, and it didn't matter even slightly. He caught her. Not all of her. She was already down, already on her knees. The forward momentum had done what it was going to do. But the head, the forward pitch of the head toward the stone, his hand was there. Under her, between her and the pavement. The sound it made was quiet. His palm on the stone. His knees hitting the ground a half second later. The child's forward motion stopped. The next 10 seconds existed on a different plane from regular time. 2 more figures were already moving from the lead vehicle. Close protection officers, I understand now, though in the moment they were just bodies moving with a contained intensity that cleared a radius around the child without anyone being visibly pushed. You were simply no longer in that space. The geometry of it shifted, and you were outside the circle. A woman emerged from a second vehicle. I won't describe her face. That's not mine to describe. But I'll tell you what was on it, because that I was close enough to see, and because it is the thing that stayed with me longer than anything else from that morning. It was the face of a mother. Not a royal, not a public figure, not a symbol of anything. A mother watching her child go down, and the specific kind of terror that lives in that, the half second of pure helpless horror before the body takes over, and the legs start moving. She crossed the space in 4 steps. She was on her knees before the circle had fully closed. And the child, the small figure in the red coat, on the ground, the guard's hand still cupping the back of her head with a gentleness that seemed almost impossible from someone in that uniform. The child made a sound. It was crying, but not hurt crying. Not the bottom of the world crying of a child in real pain. It was the complicated crying of a child who was frightened and relieved and embarrassed all at once. The kind of crying that means I'm okay, I think, but I need a minute and I don't want anyone to look at me. The mother's arms went around her. The guard stayed where he was for 1 beat. 2, making sure. His hand coming back, withdrawing to the correct position. His face doing the thing that trained faces do, returning to its composition. But not quite. Not completely. There was something, a twitch near his jaw, something that might have been, if you were standing close enough, if you were watching the margins the way I was watching the margins. Relief. The crowd exhaled. It came out of all of us at the same moment, that breath we'd been holding, and it sounded like something being put down. Like 40 people setting something heavy on the floor. The American mother near me grabbed her youngest child and held on, and the child looked up at her with the bewildered expression of someone who doesn't understand why they're being hugged but isn't complaining about it. The boy in the Tottenham kit had stopped eating his crisps. I realized my coffee was in my hand and had been the entire time, and I had no memory of holding it. The small procession moved inside, efficiently, the circle closing around the mother and child and moving with them through the entrance, the vehicles repositioning, the whole operation resolving with a quiet that was somehow louder than noise. The guard returned to his post. The same position, the same stillness, as though none of it had happened. But something had shifted in the air around him, in the way the crowd near the railing was looking at him now. Not as a statue, not as a symbol, as a person who had made a choice in less than a second, who had moved when everything about his training and his role and the rigid, centuries-old architecture of his duty said stand still, and who had moved anyway. I stood on a mall for a while longer after that. The Gray Tuesday continued doing what Gray Tuesdays do. The leaves kept falling in their slow, spinning, uncommitted way. The horse chestnut on the park side dropped one more, and it turned in the air for what felt like a very long time and landed on the pavement without a sound. My coffee had gone cold. I didn't move. I was thinking about training, about how you teach a person to hold still in the face of a crowd, in the face of weather, in the face of provocation and noise, and the constant low-level pressure of 1,000 strangers watching you not flinch. And how somewhere inside that training, beneath the stillness, beneath the ceremony, beneath all of it, you also teach them when to break the rule. That, I thought, standing there with my cold coffee and my October coat and the leaves falling around me without urgency. That is the harder lesson that my name is Declan Marsh, and I have been a paramedic in central London for 11 years. I say that not because it makes me important, but because it explains why, when I tell you what I saw that morning, you might understand why I didn't panic. Why my hand stayed steady, and my voice stayed level, and my brain was doing the triage thing it always does, sorting, categorizing, assigning priority, even while the rest of me was having a quietly catastrophic experience. You spend 11 years responding to the worst moments of people's lives, and you get very good at the surface calm. You get so good at it that sometimes you forget it's a surface. You forget there's still a human underneath it, a human with a stomach that drops, and a throat that tightens, and a specific quality of dread that no amount of training can fully sand down. That human came back that Tuesday. He'd been away a while. I was parked on Buckingham Gate in the ambulance. My partner, Saoirse, was inside a nearby building doing a welfare check on an elderly resident. Routine. The kind of call where you know before you go in that everything is probably fine, and you're there primarily as reassurance. I was in the cab, engine idling, listening to the radio play something I couldn't be bothered to identify, drinking terrible coffee from a thermos that had been purchased optimistically and had never once produced good coffee. The call came through the radio at 10:47. Not our radio. The other one. The general frequency, the one that carries the traffic that isn't yours, but that you monitor because you're always in some part of your brain listening. The words were clipped and fast and used the specific coded language that I'd heard maybe twice in 11 years in that configuration. The sequence that means, this is not routine. This is not the usual. Respond immediately and do not use the siren. Do not use the siren. That last part, that's the one that sent the cold thing up the back of my neck. Because the siren is protocol. The siren is how you clear path. When they tell you not to use the siren, they're telling you two things. First, that speed still matters. And second, that the circumstances of the situation require something the siren would destroy. Discretion, composure, the careful management of a scene that cannot be allowed to become spectacle. I had the door open before the transmission finished. I'll tell you what I knew going in and what I didn't know going in because I think it matters. What I knew: a child had fallen. The fall had been significant enough to warrant medical response. The location was the secondary entrance on the southern side of the palace complex. The child was conscious. Well, I didn't know who the child was. I found out approximately 30 seconds after I arrived from the expression on the face of the close protection officer who met me at the gate. There's an expression that people in this job, where when the stakes are beyond the standard stakes, when the thing they are managing is not merely urgent, but is weighted with consequence, with the awareness of how many people this moment will eventually touch and how it is being handled right now in this small space by a small number of people, and all of them understand that it cannot go wrong. I knew the expression. I'd worn it myself. I understood from that expression alone, before a single word was spoken, that I needed to be my very best self for the next 10 minutes. The scene inside the entrance was contained in the way that only well-trained people can contain a scene. Nobody was shouting. Nobody was running. There was a medical team, palace staff, a woman I would later understand to be a physician who travels with the family on official engagements, already crouched near the child, who was sitting up, not lying down. Sitting up, which was the first thing I assessed, and which told me a volume before I'd crossed the room. Sitting up is good. Sitting up means the brain is working, means the body has done at least part of its own damage assessment, and found no reason to be horizontal. She was crying still, but the crying had changed register since the moment of the fall. I've been told on approach how she'd been when they first reached her, and the difference was meaningful. The full-body terror, crying, had settled into something quieter, something more tired. The specific exhaustion of a child who has been frightened and who is now mostly past the fright, but not yet past the trembling. Her hands were scraped. Left palm, right knee. I could see the fabric of the trouser leg, slightly torn, the beginning of something abraded beneath it. Nothing that looked deep. Nothing that had the color of something that needed more than cleaning. Her head, the thing that had been the main concern, from what I'd been told, the forward pitch toward the stone that the guard had interrupted, was intact. No swelling I could see, no blood. But heads are not always honest in the immediate aftermath. That's what you learn in this job. Heads lie. They let you believe everything is fine, and then, an hour later, they tell you the truth. So I asked her questions. This is the thing about assessing a child who is frightened and embarrassed and being watched by too many adults. You have to find a frequency they're on. You can't just barrel in with clinical language. You have to meet them where they are. I crouched down, got below eye level. Not threatening, not looming. Hey, I said, I've had worse falls on my bicycle, and I still feel stupid about it. She looked at me. The crying hiccuped. You okay with me having a look? A small nod. The specific nod of a child who has been raised with dignity and extends it even when she's 8 years old and has just met the pavement. I went through the checks with the quiet efficiency of someone who has done this thousands of times. Pupils, responsiveness, the careful question about whether anything feels wrong in a specific way, the soft probe along the back of the neck that you do calmly so the child doesn't register it as frightening. Everything where it should be. Everything working. The woman behind her. The mother, close enough to touch, positioned so the child could see her at all times. Had a composure that I can only describe as extraordinary. Not cold. Not disconnected. She was present in every way a person can be present. Her whole body oriented toward her child. Her face open and attentive. But the panic that had been there, that I'd been told was there, that was there in any mother in that moment, was now behind something. Managed. Stored somewhere it wouldn't make the room more frightening. She met my eyes once, briefly. I gave her the smallest nod. She's okay. The breath that came out of her was almost silent. It took me 6 minutes to complete the assessment. 6 minutes is a long time when you are a child sitting on the floor of a palace entrance in a torn trouser leg, and a red coat, and too many adults are looking at you. It is a very short time when you're a paramedic making sure a head injury isn't hiding something. I reported my findings to the physician who was already there. We spoke in the language of the job, abbreviated, factual, drained of the emotional content that was present but not useful. I gave her the numbers. She nodded. We agreed on monitoring protocol. Watch for the next 4 hours, specific symptoms that would change the picture. The things to look for that would mean calling me back. She didn't need calling back. I know this because I checked later. Through the right channels, with the appropriate permissions. The way you do when a call stays with you. She was fine. She was completely, absolutely fine. But here's the thing I have not told you yet. Here is the thing I have been building toward, without knowing exactly how to say it, because it is the part of this story that doesn't fit in the triage categories and can't be expressed in the factual language I use to protect myself from the full weight of what this job asks you to carry. When I was packing up my bag, when the professional part of it was done, and I was transitioning back into the person who would walk out the gate and get back in the ambulance and drink another terrible cup of coffee from the faithless thermos, someone touched my arm. I turned. The guard. The one from outside. He'd been brought inside. I hadn't noticed when standing near the interior of the entrance in the specific way that guards stand, even when they're indoors, back straight. Weight even, taking up the precise amount of space, and no more. His bearskin was off. That was the first thing that struck me. I'd never seen a guard without the hat in an official context. He looked younger without it. He looked like a person. He didn't say anything for a moment. Just looked at me. Then, at the child, now standing, the mother's hand in hers, talking in a low voice to someone across the room with the specific resilience of children who process trauma by simply continuing. Then back at me. Is she? He started. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. She's fine, I said. The jaw, the muscle near the hinge of it. Something moved through it, something that had been held there since outside, since the moment his hand hit the stone, and the forward motion stopped, and the uncertainty of did I get there in time had been living in his body ever since. It let go. It was a small thing. He was trained against small things showing. But I see small things in this job. I look for them. You got there, I said. He nodded once. Barely. Turned back to his position. I walked out of that gate and back to the ambulance, and I sat in the cab for a moment before I called Saoirse to tell her we were clear. I sat there with my hand on the radio, and I thought about a thing my instructor told me in training back at the very beginning when I was 23 years old and certain I would be good at the comm and less certain I would be good at the rest of it. She said, the job will show you the best of people, usually in the worst moments. That's the deal. You pay in the wait and you receive in the evidence. The evidence that people will move when it matters. That people will put their palm between a child and the stone floor and not count the cost. That people, all kinds of people in all kinds of uniforms with all kinds of training, are still underneath everything people. I started the engine. Saoirse came out of the building with her bag over her shoulder and got in on the passenger side and looked at me for half a second in the way that partners look at each other when they can see something happen that the other person is still processing. She didn't ask. That's also part of the deal. She just put her seatbelt on and said, terrible coffee or worse coffee? I handed her the thermos. She took a sip and made a face. We drove, and my daughter asked me once what it feels like to be brave. She was 6 at the time. She'd asked in the way that 6-year-olds ask things. Abruptly, in the middle of dinner, with the complete seriousness that children bring to questions that adults have learned to be embarrassed by. No preambel. No lead-up. Just, Dad, what does it feel like to be brave? I told her it felt a lot like being afraid, except with better posture. She thought about that for a moment, decided it was unsatisfying, and went back to her peas. She was right to be unsatisfied. It was a deflection dressed up as an answer. The kind of thing you say when you don't want to open the door all the way because you're not sure what's behind it. I've had more time to think about it since then. Since Tuesday. My name is Thomas Aldrich, Sergeant, Household Division. I have served in this role for 9 years. I am not writing this because I think what I did was exceptional. I am writing this because someone asked me to, a person within the organization whose request I am not in a position to decline, and who suggested that the account of that morning, written in my own words, might serve some purpose I am not entirely sure I understand. So, my own words. Here they are. That morning began as mornings in this role begin, with the physical putting on of a self. That is the only way I know how to describe it. The uniform is not merely clothing. It is an argument. It argues by its existence that certain things are permanent, that there is continuity, that there is order, that the institution it represents has survived everything it has been asked to survive and intends to continue doing so. When you put on, you are agreeing to be part of that argument for the duration of your post. You stand still. This is not as simple as it sounds. The crowd tests the stillness in ways you don't anticipate before you've done the thing itself. Not the tourists who are merely curious, not the children who wave and wait to see if you'll waver. It's the quality of sustained attention, the weight of being watched not once, but continuously, of being, in some sense, an object of speculation for every person who passes, which on a busy day at this location numbers in the several thousands. You learn to put yourself somewhere else while your body holds the post. Not absent, present enough, but located in a quieter room than the one your body is standing in. I had been in that quieter room that morning when the convoy arrived. I was aware of it. I was always aware of everything. The training ensures that, regardless of where your mind is, some part of you is always monitoring. Temperature of the scene, peripheral movement, the location of every person within your operational radius. That part registered. Vehicles, secondary entrance, arrival. I did not move my eyes. The door of the second vehicle opened, and I saw the child step out. This is the thing I'm trying to explain, and struggling with the words for, I did not make a decision. Not in the way the word decision implies, a deliberation, a weighing, a conscious choice between options. What happened was faster than thought. The foot caught. The balance went. The body tipped. The momentum began its forward carry, and my body understood from the angle and the distance and the physics of it where the head was going to be in approximately 3/4 of a second. I was already moving before the understanding finished forming. This is what training does, I think. It doesn't teach you what to do so much as it makes certain responses so practiced, so drilled into the body at the level beneath language, that when the moment comes, the body simply goes. Without consulting you, without the cost of the half-second that conscious decision-making requires. In this case, that half-second was the entire margin. I crossed the distance. My knees hit the ground. My right hand, I am right-handed, and my right side was the side facing her, and this matters because it was the hand that was already moving, already in the right position to intercept. My right hand went between her head and the stone. The impact came. It was not nothing. The forward momentum of a child in motion is not trivial. My palm took the weight of it, and the stone took the weight of my palm, and my wrist bent back further than wrists prefer, and there was pain, yes, though I did not register it as pain in the moment. I registered it as confirmation. Contact. Interception made. Forward motion stopped. She was on the ground. She was crying. She was crying, which meant she was conscious, which meant she was here, present. The particular relief of that sound. Crying is breathing. Crying is a brain sending signals. Crying is, in this moment, the best possible sound in the world. The mother was there. The close protection team was there. I withdrew my hand. I returned to my feet. I returned to my post. And that is where the external account ends and the internal one begins. Because standing at my post for the next 40 minutes was the longest 40 minutes I have served in this role. Not because of pain. The wrist, I found out later, had a minor sprain, nothing that required significant intervention. Not because of any procedural uncertainty about what I had done or whether it was correct. Because of a not knowing. That is the thing nobody tells you on either side of the uniform. The knowing how to move is one thing. The waiting to find out if the movement was enough. That is a different thing entirely. That lives in a part of you that the training doesn't reach. She was inside. She had people around her. There was a medical professional on site. All of this I knew. And still, the 40 minutes, the not knowing, standing in the position in the quieter room, except the quieter room was not quiet. The quieter room had a child in a red coat in it, and a stone floor, and the angle of a fall, and the question that repeated with the specific mercilessness of questions you cannot answer from the outside. Was it enough? When they brought me inside, I did not know why. It is not standard. My position is the position. You hold it or you are relieved from it. You do not simply step inside mid-post without specific cause. The cause was not explained to me. I was simply told, "Come in." I came in. The first thing I saw was the child standing up. Standing, under her own power. Her hand in her mother's. Her face, tear-tracked, yes, still in the aftermath of it, turned toward someone across the room, and she was saying something. Talking, clearly, coherently, in the particular mode of children who have moved through the frightening thing and come out the other side and are now actively processing it by narrating it to the nearest adult. I do not have the vocabulary for what went through me in that moment. I'm a person who has, over 9 years, developed a considered skepticism toward his own emotional responses. They're not always useful in this role, and learning to account for them without being governed by them is part of the work. But that moment, that particular sight, standing up, it went through me like something structural giving way, like a building choosing, finally, to put down something it had been holding since it was built. The paramedic was there. Aldridge, he told me his name later, though I have since understood that names should perhaps not appear in accounts like this. He had his bag over his shoulder, and he had the look of someone who has just finished doing their job well, and knows it. He saw me looking at her. He said, "She's fine." 2 words. 2 words do not seem like enough to carry the weight of what they were carrying. They were enough. I'm going to tell you the thing I did not tell anyone that day, and have not told anyone since, and am only putting here because this account was requested as a full one, and a partial truth is just a shaped lie. When I walked back outside, when I returned to my position, when I resumed the stillness that is the argument, the posture, the continuity, my hand was shaking. Not visibly. I did not believe it was visible. I was standing with my hands at my sides in the correct position, and the shaking was internal, a fine tremor that lived in the wrist that had hit the stone and had traveled up my arm and was living for several minutes in the general vicinity of my sternum. It is the body's way of billing you. You spend the moment of action without accessing the fear. The fear is not useful in the moment, so the body files it somewhere, stores it, processes it later when the hands are at the sides, and the post is resumed, and the crowd is continuing, and the leaves are still doing what they were doing before, and then it sends the invoice. The shaking is the invoice. I stood there, and I paid it, and I kept my face at its appointed setting, and the crowd continued, and the gray October sky continued, and the horse chestnut trees in the park continued their slow release of the things they were no longer holding. The tremor passed in 4 minutes. I counted. My daughter asked me what it feels like to be brave. I have a better answer now. It does not feel like courage in the moment. Courage implies awareness, implies a known risk, weighed and accepted. In the moment, there is no awareness and there is no weighing. There's only the body going where the body goes and the mind catching up afterward. The bravery, if it exists at all, is not in the moving. It is in the standing still. After, when the tremor comes and you pay the invoice and you remain at your post and nobody in the crowd behind the railing knows the difference and the gray sky continues being gray and the leaves fall at their same unhurried pace and you hold the argument, the uniform, the continuity, the we are still here and we're still the same. You hold it even while something inside it is quietly, invisibly shaking. That is the bravery, not the second of action. The 40 minutes after. I will go home tonight, and I will see my daughter, and she will have forgotten the question by now, because she is 6, and there are newer questions. There are always newer questions. I will not tell her about Tuesday. She is 6. Tuesday is not a 6-year-old story. But I will answer the question when it comes again, because children always return to the real questions, eventually in new forms. I will tell her that bravery is not the absence of shaking. It is the decision to stand still anyway. She will probably decide it's still unsatisfying and go back to her peas. She'd be right. Some answers are too large for the words we have. We stand at our posts anyway, holding them in the best posture we can manage. That's all. That's the whole of it.